Good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. Thank you all for joining us. I am Ben Suzuki, Director of Japan Foundation Manila. We are honored to hold this curatorial development program with our partners, the Philippine Contemporary Art Network and UP Vargas Museum. The Japan Foundation has organized various art exchange programs for curators and artists in Southeast Asia to enhance expertise in curating contemporary art and to strengthen networks for next generation of curators. We have worked with the UP Vargas Museum since 2009 to conduct such curatorial workshop to meet this goal. We hope that today's webinar with our esteemed speakers brings us deeper understanding of art and curation in these difficult times. We would like to thank Patrick Flores, Tessa Maria Guazon, Renan Laru-an, and Roberto Paulino, members of PCAN, for their invaluable work with this program. We encourage everyone to ask questions for our speakers on the Zoom Q&A box and the Facebook live comment section during the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator of this panel, Dr. Patrick Flores, Director of PCAN and Curator of the UP Vargas Museum. Hi, Patrick.
Hello. Hello, Ben, and thank you, Ben, for the introduction. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 edition of the Curatorial Development Workshop. As Ben has mentioned, we've been doing this for a decade now. And when we first did it, it was with Ben Suzuki, actually, when he was first director of the Japan Foundation Manila. So it's a happy reunion of sorts today. So the 2020 edition seeks to reflect on the relationship between the social context of the public health crisis brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic and the kind of curatorial mode that is responsive to the ecology of production of the moment. This production has been disrupted because of the restrictions on basic mobility, domestic and international travel, physical interaction, and general everyday activity. The situation, coupled with uncertainty and unpredictability, has affected the economic and emotional well-being of everyone all over the world and rendered daily life and the imagination of the future precarious, even as various forms of violence and repression have heightened. The workshop would like to speak to this context, to explain and propose ways of understanding the complex and delicate condition, and to translate these strategies into a curatorial mode or instinct. Two aspects that have been upset in curatorial production in light of the pandemic are sequence of processes and situation of engagements. Instead of exclusively migrating these aspects to the digital environment, curatorial work may instead rethink the sequence and the situation so that the most recognizable culmination of the curatorial endeavor ceases to be the typical exhibition as organized by the curator who relies on a previous status quo of the so-called supply chain or life cycle of works for presentation. As a tactical recourse, the curator can foreground at this point in pandemic time, the prehistory and the afterlife of the recognizable exhibitionary and therefore curatorial form. The curator thus curates the process of research and the remediation of whatever is produced. Production is in itself part of the investigation and the experiment. It is not imagined in terms of an object, completed and final. It is rather seen as a project that mutates and iterates in time. It is in this light that the Curatorial Development Workshop for 2020 can focus not on the stable nouns or categories like exhibition or work of art, but on prefixes, which are proto and para, precursor and extension. In conceptualizing this public program, we thought of inviting speakers who may implicate the various spheres in which curatorial work takes place and through which the nature and practice of curatorial work may be rethought or transformed. In this light, the speakers this morning offer possibilities across three modes: the exhibition, the archive, and performance. It is my honor and pleasure to briefly introduce our guest speakers for this morning. Joining us all the way from New York, our first speaker is Yuki Kamiya, who has been the gallery director of Japan Society New York since 2015. Formerly, Ms. Kamiya was chief curator of Hiroshima City Museum of Contemporary Art, or Hiroshima MoCA, and associate curator of New Museum, New York. She has curated a number of exhibitions internationally and co-curated Proles, the 12th Shanghai Biennial in China in 2018 and 19. She has also served as guest curator for cultural institutions, including the Japan Foundation. So welcome, Yuki. The next speaker is Chung Daivo, who is a researcher at Asia Art Archive based in Hong Kong, specializing in modern and contemporary art related to Southeast Asia. She is supervising currently the acquisition of 3 archival collections: Li Wen, the Singaporean artist, Green Papaya art projects in the Philippines, and artist-generated spaces in Manila. Her writing can be found in publications such as After All, Sismography de Lutte, Southern Constellations, The Poetics of the Non-Aligned, Taipei Fine Arts Museum's Modern Quarterly, and the anthology Film in Contemporary Southeast Asia. So welcome, Chuong-Dai. And our final speaker is Taufik Darwis, a dramaturg, curator, researcher, and theater director, and lives in Bandung, Indonesia. He is the co-founder of the Bandung Performing Arts Forum and a member of the Dramaturgy Assembly. With BPAF, he produces programs and projects that are carried out in the ethos of shifting, exchanging, and disclosing by involving different subjects, communities, and locations. As a curator, he has worked for the Campana program, the Indonesian Dance Festival from 2016 to 2018, and the Cabaret Chairil program, Theater Garasi or Garasi Performance Institute from 2018 to 2019. So welcome, Taufik. Let us now hear from our first speaker, Yuki Kamiya, the gallery director of Japan Society in New York. So Yuki, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick, for introducing me. It's a long time friends. And thank you also to Japan Foundation Manila Director, Mr. Ben Suzuki, and also all the staff, and the Philippine Contemporary Art Network and the UP Vargas Museum. Under this challenging condition for pandemic, which we are not allowed to be travel or gather, it's a great honor to be here together beyond distance across the Pacific Ocean. So today, I'd like to introduce the curatorial attempt at Japan Society in New York, including a new commission project on virtual platform, as an urgent reaction and the response to this period of isolation. So let me share the PowerPoint. Yeah. So please let me introduce. Yeah, my institution, Japan Society. Founded in 1907, a nonprofit American institution, Japan Society has a mission to foster connection between the United States and Japan for over a century. It's just after the Japan-Russian War. Our institution and the curated program have dedicated to develop and cultivate a broader understanding between the different cultures. Yeah. We actually literally the window and the door open to the outside of the United States and place for gathering to experience other culture. However, for the unforeseen health crisis from mid-March, Japan Society and all the institutions in New York has closed the door to public. What's New York State recorded the worst and the highest cases of infection of the death rate, and with the virus, with this coronavirus in this spring. So what we have seen in this city was what we haven't seen before. By the end of the March, New York City's landmark converted to the hospital, like a Central Park, trade fair site, even a US Open tennis stadium, Navy hospital ship named Comfort with 100 beds docked in Manhattan, where it was not so far from the site like a Golden Matter Club. David Wanalowitz did artistic intervention in the 70s. Museum and art institution are the place to gather on site, but we immediately shift the program on virtual platform. At Japan Society, for example, the New York is not familiar. New York is not familiar to stay home. So now our online programs start encouraging the community to stay home creatively. For family, we distributed coloring of Nara Yoshitomo drawing with the support from this artist. As you can imagine, it was so popular and the people posted their drawings. We tried to create dialogue between the institution and audiences and community through the virtual platform. Also, we started e-studio visit program entitled Spotlight. Artists are also isolated and from the community and lost the opportunity to exhibit their works and develop dialogue. And we directly connected their personal space for production with the Zoom connection. So it was very simple, but very important for all to have shared live experience. The photo is a studio and home of Susan Cianciolo, Bronx-based textile artist. She do some demonstration to the audience, but immediately her cat jumped onto the table. So it's unexpected accident, but including all the experience, it's such a fantastic live experience exchange. By early summer, New York had great progress and the situation got improved dramatically. However, people's anger and frustration to the inequality in the social, in this society became the big movement of protest, Black Lives Matter. Protesters had actually very positive energy and those are very healthy, passionate action. However, at night, vandalism happened with a very different group of people and the violence smashed the city. So the situation got complicated and all the storefront was covered by plywood like that. So you can see the early summer typical New York, not so many cars and people won't use public transportation. It's a bike is one of the most popular transportation and also for the delivery of the food. However, people always found the space to be creative. Soon after the storefront was blocked, graffiti emerged all over the city. I think since the Keith Haring disappeared from the city in 80s, you can see the intervention in this urban environment, maybe for the first time in the sophisticated city center. At the period, I felt the urgency of new curatorial practice to respond and react on this uncertain environment. The time has come not to wait to be back before, but act. This is a reason and motif online visual art program. It is a new commission project we entitled From Here to There. Under this ongoing challenge of our daily condition, we set some questions. What can a curator do as an intermediary of artists, for audiences, for communities? We re-examine our role as an art institution. How can our curatorial attempt generate a shared platform and experiences on virtual platform? So in September, we launched the project entitled From Here to There, which initiated as a testing ground for artistic practice, dialogue, production, and collaboration. Artists had faced various difficulties and challenges. Art community as well, who appreciated art, who exhibited art, and who were supported by art, all in trouble. So this project became a response to our urgent issue. One, collapse distance in the time of isolation and create an alternative shared platform. Two, create an opportunity for art production, display, and presentation, and place for communication. Three is the response to our collective resilience. This project is an attempt to explore the potential of the virtual platform, which encourage us to have imagination and the site for collaboration beyond physical distance. We invite 3 artists to work together with us for this challenge: Nobutaka Aozaki, Hanako Murakami, and Akisa Samoto. They work in a different media: photography, drawing, performance, and video, but all works concerned to crossing time and space with their own direction and interpretation of media. We prepared a platform of 4 months long free access website, plus bi-weekly live events. This is an attempt to bridge physical site for art and with online site exploring creative process and cultivating dialogue around the visual art today. So let me introduce each project briefly. Nobu Aozaki works on Broadway, which is a major avenue stretched from the South Financial District, Chinatown, Union Square, Midtown, and then Columbia University up to north tip of Manhattan. Past 3 years, he recorded names of every retail business along Broadway. On this website project, he created a long list of the store names, which become a snapshot of the city. So you can briefly see that website. It's east side and west side. It's a long list of the store is listed. It's a very simple recording like on Kawara, but it's unveiled the effect of COVID-19 to the people's living and business. You can find so many empty spots and space for rent. On street, the artists also collect ephemera, including shopping list, which people throw away in front of the supermarket. So Nobu Aozaki did shopping followed by the list, takes the pictures of this item of the products, which become a portrait of the cultural diversity of the city. Some shopping lists written in Chinese and Hispanic, and there is a kind of list of the Jewish product and many other. Actually, Origin of Broadway was an important Native American trail. His work depicts the conceptual portrait of the city, having adapted many changes for a long time. So you can see variety of a list of the portrait. And as a live performance, he organized almost poetry reading of Broadway on detail. For 2 hours long, 8 performers, one by one, step by step, lead entire list of the detail names with the social distance. And this is a simple action, just a name, but such a kind of moving, touching moment. We can see through the action behind, there is a life of the people. Another artist, Hanako Murakami. Murakami new series of photography works entitled Imaginary Landscape is unused vintage film and the photographic plates, which she collected around the world. When she developed it, it became a metaphysical journey across the time and space. Her work depicts not the moment, not the special landscape, but the accumulation of time. Also the space. So it's very abstract, but it's only some kind of the light during the time it's the film accumulated can be shown up. She's in Paris and had the restriction during the lockdown to go out beyond 1 kilometer. So she couldn't go to her studio. Instead, she transformed her home bathroom as a temporary darkroom. Without traveling physically, she inspired our imagination and makes us evoke imaginary landscape. Some of the film is also produced before the World War II. It's actually expected to use the bombing site, but we know nothing is there. But it's from the history we know what was there. So Murakami also mentioned interestingly about materiality and texture, which is one of the very difficult things through using the monitor and computer. However, with her website, she even enjoyed and appreciated the new textures through the monitor. So we set up some list of the artwork. It's one click, you can go closer. It's another close up and a much more close up. So more than physical distance, we can control the distance and they can see some new texture of the photography. Another artist, Akisa Samoto, worked at the intersection of performance and the installation, employing object, sculpture, video, and anything around her, and explore mundane action, situation, and context, transforming into her artistic product. She's an artist and a faculty member of Yale School of Arts. She had extremely hard time not to be able to create a live work, nor collaboration in person. All over the world, students also lost the opportunity to experience on live. We decided to use this opportunity for their attempt. Her statement said, the physical side of performance is there, have always been there, and will continue to be a host for our performance. We as the artists will make the performance a live experience without being physically present together. She takes this challenge with her student to question to themselves, but also to us, what makes the performance live? She and the student use various devices, as you can see, Zoom, mobile phone, even a fax machine, which is a little bit antique for the communication. But all the devices, she tried to connect two different places together. In coming 2 days, she's going to test this idea of performance making. No audience, no collaborator beside you, but everyone is connected on the shared virtual platform. We are going to accept all the failure, not only success, because it is a part of a live experience. We try to explore it can be recorded perfectly or just on live. All three artists decided to do the live performance using on virtual platform. So imperfection is part of the experience. So it is really, we are trying to create new experience together, our audience and artist. We are still willing to be back to the physical site, but this is a challenge moment, gives us a new curatorial attempt to explore the potential site and the space to be creative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuki, for that wonderful presentation. So we now move on to the next speaker, Chung-Dai. So welcome, Chung-Dai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. And I also like to thank the Japan Foundation Manila and the Philippine Contemporary Art Network. For my presentation, I'll be looking at 3 projects that Asia Art Archive has done. And I'd like to think about the invisible labor that often is not a part of what we think of as curatorial practice. And so here I'm looking specifically at archival research, which leads to exhibitions, but which itself can also be the exhibition. So the 3 projects I'll be looking at are Artists Investigating Monuments, Womanifesto, and Ho Zhuan's The Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia. And I'm looking at these 3 projects to think about some of the issues that have been highlighted and accentuated during the pandemic. And these issues specifically are social justice protests, so the anti-racism protests in the US that have been led by Black Lives Matters, and the anti-colonial struggles that have been happening in other parts of the world. The second issue I like to think about is the restrictions on physical movement and social interaction. And then the third is our increased reliance on the internet and technology. And the question I like to think about is, of course, issues of access, but also what kind of knowledge is available and how do we judge, analyze the information that is available. So for the first project, I'm looking at artists investigating movements. And the reason I'm interested in this project and in the other 2 projects is I'd like to think about collective practices and how all of these projects are very porous in the sense that they invite other artists to participate. They're porous in their development and their ability to adapt to the times, to the locations. And in that, they transform themselves. So Artists Investigating Monuments was a project that started in 2000 by some artists who were part of the Artist Village, a collective based in Singapore. And for this first iteration, they invited 16 artists to respond to 3 locations: the Raffles Landing site, the former Merlion Park, and the Hong Lim Park, all in Singapore. And I think this project is something to revisit in light of the toppling monuments movements that are happening in various parts of the world. So the artists, in thinking about monuments, they had 3 questions that they wanted to raise, both for themselves and also for their fellow practitioners and for the audience. The first was, what is the relevance of public monuments and sculptures? The second is the issue of the permanent over the ephemeral. And then the third is collective memories and what are the social issues that these sites embody or that they want us to remember. And for this project, it had several iterations over the years, and I like to focus on 2. So the first one was a project that Li Wen proposed in 2000. Originally, he was thinking that he would adapt a persona that he had created in the early 1990s called Yellow Man. Yellow Man was a persona that he created when he was living in London from 1990 to 1992. And in that time, he often was asked or assumed that he was from China, as in Chinese mainland. And for him, that was very disorienting because he grew up in an English language educational system and in Singapore, which for him had a very different identity. And so he came up with Yellow Man to think through the project of Orientalism. And so here, his original idea for Artists Investigating Monuments was to create a scaffold and to place the Yellow Man at the same level as the Rafale Statue in Singapore. The Rafale Statue was erected in 1990 on the 100th anniversary of the supposed landing of Stanford Raffles, who was a British officer who had led the invasion of the Indonesian island of Java, and then later the colonization of Singapore and the Straits settlements. And he was interested in this statue in terms of why the statue is here, and why is it that Raffles has been erected to commemorate the founding of Singapore. And over time, he adapted it so that he created a scaffold and invited people to climb up to the top of the scaffold to look at Raffles at eye level. And a lot of the participants, one of the things that they talked about was how they didn't realize there were certain things that they could see at eye level that they couldn't see at ground level. And so here the project brought up the question of perception and of knowledge, and the role of location in constructing knowledge. Over the years, artists investigating monuments invited different artists to participate. So this is a map of the first iteration of artists investigating monuments that shows the 3 sites that they wanted to explore: Merlion, the Raffles Landing, and the Hong Lim Park. And these are images of those 3 sites. This is a draft of Li Wen's proposal for putting the Yellow Man in conversation with the Raffles Monument. Okay. So this is another iteration of Artists Investigating Monuments. So in 2005, Artists Investigating Monuments was invited to participate in an exhibition at the House of World Cultures in Berlin. This was an exhibition that was curated by Gutia Gawi Wong and Aung San Ken. So for Artists Investigating Monuments, this iteration was represented by Li Wen and Kai Lam. And they were interested in the sculpture by Henry Moore that is in front of the House of World Cultures. And they wanted to link that work with the work that they had been doing in Singapore. And so in Singapore, there is a Henry Moore sculpture, and through their research, they found out that the owners of the sculpture had cleaned the sculpture to the extent that it rubbed off the patina, and the foundation objected to this. And so Kai Lam and Li Wen took this, and they wanted to make this connection to the sculpture in Berlin. And the proposal was that they would clean the sculpture, do it as a performance, and they also wanted to create a pontoon or a bridge, a walkway, so that visitors could come up close to the sculpture and look at it. And this cleaning action brought up some historical references for them. So one is the reference, of course, to the sculpture in Singapore, but the larger concept that they wanted to engage with is the culture of cleanliness, the obsession with cleanliness that defines Singapore culture. And so for them, this obsession with cleanliness, it hides the invisible labor that is usually done by immigrant workers. Right? And so it brings up issues of inequity in terms of labor, and specifically invisible labor. It's also a neo-colonial system. And that itself refers back to the history of Victorian British colonialism, which uses cleanliness as a way to define the distinctions between the colonizer and the colonized, and the distinctions between the ruling class and the local population. The third project I like to look at is an exhibition that is currently in the AAA library called Crafting Communities. This is an exhibition curated by my colleague, John Tain, and it uses material from the Women Manifesto archive, which AAA will launch next month. Women Manifesto is a feminist biennial program that was active in Thailand from 1997 to 2008. The main objective for this biennial was to create a space for women artists in a scene that was heavily dominated by men. Women Manifesto had originally started as an exhibition, but what's interesting about it is that it adapted over time to the needs of its participants and of the circumstances. So for example, the 1999 edition was mainly installations and performances that happened in Bangkok's Saranam Park. The 2003 edition was entitled Procreation / Post-Creation, and it was an international art exchange with artists in Thailand and around the world. Women artists were asked to respond to the theme of procreation, post-creation, and to mail their work to the organizers in Bangkok. The works were gathered in a box set that was made available for each of the participants. And so here you can see it's in the vitrine, this box, and then here are some of the works on paper that the women artists created for the exhibition. In the 2001 and 2008 edition, the artists spent 10 days and then later a month at Boon Barnum Farm in the Isan region of Northeast Thailand. And there they learned basketry, weaving, local folklore, and history from the local craftspeople. And in turn, the artists organized their own workshops so that they could work with students from nearby schools and universities, and also collaborate with local people to develop projects. And so this was very much, the focus was on the process of learning and the process of learning how to collaborate between the artists and the local people. So production itself was not the main focus. What was unique about Women Manifesto is that it released the artists from the pressures of production so that they could focus on building their relationships with one another, with the local communities, and they could think together what projects were possible. The third project I'd like to look at is Hosuan's The Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia, Volume 1, G for Ghostwriters. This was a project that I worked on with Hosuan in 2007. Hosuan was the lead for the project, but what's interesting is that it was also very much a collaboration with some people who he has worked on for multiple projects and whom he continues to work on. So for this iteration, Hosuan worked with his longtime collaborator, Bani Hako. And then he also worked with a duo in Berlin called Padma. And later, he also worked with a composer named Yasuhiro Morinaga. So for this installation that we did in the library, there were 3 films, a set of books, an interactive internet dictionary, and lenticular prints and still frames. The main goal of this exhibition was to bring up questions of what is this region known as Southeast Asia? And it wasn't so much an effort to define the region, but it was more to think about how narratives shape reality and shape our understanding of what we receive. And what's interesting about it is that the project raises the question of this stability of vision in terms of what we see on the internet and the endless stream of information that is available to us. So the project included an infinite film and what was known as an internet dictionary. And this is something that I would like to play for us towards the end. The dictionary, as you can see here, was made available on the desktops that are in our library. The dictionary comes together in multiple ways. It's organized according to the Roman alphabet of 26 letters. And the images that you see are clips that have been annotated from more than 6,000 films that Padma has downloaded. And then each of those films are annotated according to certain parameters that Hosun has created. And then there's an algorithm that determines the sequence that we see the images in. And so in that sense, the film that we see is never the same film each time that you click on it. So let me just play it and then I'll come back to conclude the presentation.
Through the effects of ghosts on the affairs of the living requires an ethnography that explores representational forms that go beyond language. It requires an expanded semiosis, makes spirits visible, material and sensible, an act of transforming something across modalities of life and death, real and fictional, across past and present, a kind of ghostwriting.
So the letter that I played for you is G, and G stands for Jean Z Hanrahan. Jean Z Hanrahan was supposedly an author who wrote and edited 16 books, which are on display in the exhibition. And these books range widely in the topics that they covered, anything from the communist struggle in Malaya to the wild years of Ernest Hemingway and 50 great Oriental stories. So when Hosun was doing the research for this character, he found little trace of him as a real person. And he started wondering if this person actually existed or if he was a pseudonym ghostwriter for the US government agencies during the Cold War. As you can see from the clip, there are multiple film clips, but do we really understand what the overall narrative is? And so does it actually give us any understanding of what a ghostwriter is, or even of what the region called Southeast Asia is? And so a way for us to think about this is, in this time of fake news and COVID-19, we spend a lot of time on the internet. There are endless repositories of information that are available, but how do we assess what we're seeing? And the availability of information, of big data, does this mean that we actually understand anything much better? And so I just wanted to end with that, to think about that during this pandemic, some of the basic things that we do in terms of analyzing, of thinking about projects through research, these things do not change, but these tools can also help us to think about this very particular moment that we're living in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chung-Dai, for that wonderful presentation. We now move on to the last speaker, Taufik Darwis. So Taufik, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Jevania. Thank you, Renan, for inviting me. I will share my presentation. Before I start my presentation, I want to say that this presentation is not intended to directly respond to the issue of how to seek the possibility of curatorial modes in the pandemic era. I feel now that I am no more than an ordinary or common people who are trying to survive breathing behind these seats of privilege as an artist and my belief in the function of art. So this presentation, it's more of reflective effort of my experience in dramaturgical and curatorial work. So maybe it can be very personal, but I hope it has some resonance for you. And happily this is what Mas Renan asked for. I use the word rupture, where also in time of pandemic we are dealing with it, and maybe for some it is going radically. This word also connects to the workshop issue, as mentioned, two aspects that have been upset in curatorial production in light of the pandemic are sequence of processes and situation of engagements. So for me, this keyword is quite relevant to identify and explore my past experience. I hope it is not to be abstract. I will start from my experience on my own collective, the Bandung Performing Arts Forum, which was founded in 2016. In principle, we walk through an ethos of shifting, exchanging, and disclosing. We have chosen this ethos to span a spectrum from two categories that are often referred to in the field of the performing arts, including performance and audience. This may be naive, but we see that the simple relationship between the performance and the audience also means the relationship between artist and citizen, and art and state, because there is tension from the social political process behind it. I will give two examples of BPIF project. The first one is the one I directed, and the second one I play as a dramaturg and program manager. Membeli ingatan or buying memories. This work explores the performativity of Bandung, which is called the city of creative economy, the poverty of theater, transit of theater audience interview in Bandung from 1997 until 2011, and memories of the actors' training experience. The By Memory project wrote through a series of statements and questions like this. 1. The artist is not the center of the art. 2. Working with categories, namely the history of multitude in the theater. 3. What does the public expect from the theater, and how the artists imagine and position themselves in the public? 4. To open, to doubt, to question, and answers the historical situation of theater production. The second one project is As Not As project. In this project, we made quite a complex experiment because we had to make a performance, and also in that process, we made some sort of public programs, such as discussion and workshop to distribute this course, and internally it was also as a practice. This project lasts for 1 year. We chose one of the post-eviction site in the city of Bandung as our main binoculars to explore one of our basic questions. What is the difference between being an artist and a citizen? When we are run currently, and will there be eviction of residents on behalf of the city happiness index? As a whole, this project has never performed. other than in the form of a work in progress presentation at the ASEAN Dramaturgs Network Laboratory in Jogja. But on the other hand, for us, this project has a good impact on the expansion of the distribution of discourse, the development and exchange of knowledge, and allow for the emergence of personal works or projects. Next, I will share my experience at the ADF as a curator for the Kampana program. The ADF is Indonesian Dance Festival. In 2016, I was then invited to be involved as one of the curatorial teams at the Indonesian Dance Festival, especially for the Kampana program, which was formed in 2018 to replace the term and format of the showcase. There is an effort to position the IDF not only as a display center for Indonesian contemporary dance, but also to see the importance of the processes and modes of production in its work. Like what happened at the Kampana program with young Indonesian dance practitioners in a series of workshops. We share the result of research projects, especially the research of Indonesian dance figures, such as Bagong Kusudiarja or Sardono Wekusumo, to find out the context by opening modes of production and the artistic environment of each figure, who also open our contestation of definition and practice of dance and choreography in Indonesia until now. Besides that, together with other curators, I also designed a kind of workshop curriculum and provided some kind of assistance for the process of the selected choreographer to develop their idea and interest. Next, I will go to my experience as a curator in the Cabaret Hall program at Theater Garasi or Garasi Performance Institute. Cabaret High Reel is a transit space for presenting a repertoire of experimental performance across media and discipline, including dance, theater, sculpture, architecture, performing art, and music. This transit space is an audience laboratory between the audience and the artist to manage various developing ideas, works, and aesthetic agendas. I invite 3 until 4 artists every 2 months for 3 festivals a year. Besides continuing to try to curate the relationship between social space, aesthetic experience, and the public, I also need to examine and parse the duration or tempo of growth of ideas, and from in each artist's experimental process with a set schedule to present the ongoing work. So for me, every artist are the dialogue partner for myself in carrying out a curatorial vision. So in every discussion after performance, we always ask the audience what has been opened from the performance, because we believe every work always open up other possibilities for that work and for other things. Therefore, it can develop even to a variety of mediums and conversation with also vary according to the location and field of discourse of medium itself. Thank you. Sorry if my presentation isn't visionary now. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Taufik, for that presentation. So I now turn over the task to Tessa Guazon.
Okay, thank you to our speakers for sharing insights on art and curatorial practice. And thank you to Patrick as well for moderating the panel discussion. I am Tessa, and I am coordinator for exhibitions and curatorial practice of the Philippine Contemporary Art Network, or PCAN. I am one of the mentors for the Curatorial Development Workshop alongside colleagues Patrick Flores, who is director for PCAN, and Renan Laru-an, who is coordinator for public engagement and artistic formation. I will moderate the discussion following the presentations. Our audiences can now send questions through the chat box on Zoom and via the comment thread on our Facebook Live feed. Right. I think we have a few questions, but before that, let us gather some ideas from the presentation. So what was evident to me was that the presentations from our speakers cited projects that aimed at efforts to generate collectivities, however transitory. The exhibitions they mentioned from Japan Society's virtual project From Here to There, Asia Art Archives, artists investigating monuments, Mu Manifesto, and the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia, to Taufik Darwis's Bandung Performing Arts, Membeling Ingatan or Buying Memories, Us Not Us projects, his participation in the Campana program. All these presented new avenues of encounter and new modes of making visible things that have been hidden before, as Chuong-Dai Vo mentioned. These shared platforms put in relief the roles of curators as intermediaries or mediators, and as intervening in social conditions. Perhaps what the pandemic did was to reveal this very entrenched social inequalities. And we've seen how art practice, our curatorial practices, have become very instrumental in making these inequalities visible. Perhaps what is very pertinent is to ask the following questions. What do these new avenues of encounter, what potentials do they present? What potentials do they offer? And what new knowledges or forms of knowing do they generate? How do we intervene in these knowledge making? When we wrestle with the crisis, in the process of wrestling with this the crisis and the others that we have yet to experience, we hope that we become critical, ever more critical, and we feed our capacities for an imagination that is both radical and hopeful. So I think on that note, we can move to the questions. So I'm seeing a question here. How does one get institutional approval for public art projects if it is about institutional power? And this is a question for Chuong-Dai and is related to the presentation on the project Artists Investigating Monuments. All right, so what I'll do is to gather 3 questions first, mention to whom they are addressed. Okay, so that's the first question for Chuong-Dai. How do you get institutional approval for public art projects if it critiques the institutions themselves? And this is related to the project Artists Investigating Monuments. Okay.
Could
The
I
other
answer?
question, I'll just mention 2 other questions so we can answer them all together. Another question is for Kamiya-san. How can the Japan Society's platform increase accessibility, and would there be similar efforts to have an integration of well-being practices in the virtual project? So access is a very important issue. All right, so maybe we can focus on those 3 for Kamiya-san and Chuong-Dai. Yes, Chuong-Dai, you may proceed to answer the first question.
So in regards to artists investigating monuments and having institutional approval, I think I can't answer from the perspective of the artists who negotiate approval for these projects, but perhaps I can think about it as a researcher in terms of what the archival material tells us or helps us to understand, right? So, the projects that we see or the exhibitions that we see, oftentimes we only see the public face of them, and we only see what is the end result of a very long process of research and negotiation. And I think what's interesting about archival work is that we are privy to a lot of the different proposals that the artists made, right? And the correspondences that are involved in the negotiations. And so, for example, even with the first iteration of artists investigating monuments, we see the email exchanges between the artists, the texts. And I think what's interesting in thinking about that is that it's not just the end product that matters, but it's the very process of the artists negotiating with one another, exchanging ideas. Oftentimes they may be conflicting ideas, but how is it that they are able to find common ground? And so I think that's one of the things that we can think about in terms of what constitutes art making and curatorial practice. Another thing is with the iteration that happened at the House of World Cultures, for example, the draft that I showed you, of the mock that Li Wen and Kai Lan proposed for the pontoon, that wasn't the first shape of that proposal that they wanted to do. Originally, they wanted to create these huge plastic inflatable lotus flowers, right? But through several negotiations with the institution, and I think also their own research in terms of how to think about what it means to question colonial monuments and monuments in general in Singapore, and then how to bring that process and that knowledge to this project in Berlin. I think in all of that, they adjusted their project. And I think sometimes it isn't just a matter of gaining approval from the institution itself, but it's also how the research shapes the project. And I think that's why archival research is so important in helping us to understand the process, the shape, and the multiple issues that do come up in any project that finally does take formation.
Thank you, Chung-Dai. Kamiya-san.
Yep, thank you for the great question. Public institutions, the accessibility is one of the very important things. And before this pandemic, we didn't realize as a culture-specific institution in New York, we major audience is local New Yorker. And of course, it's around the States. However, we realize online give a much more great possibility to reach to other side of the Pacific Ocean, like other side of the globe. So we now, as a platform, to be able to expand because of this accessibility through the online. So now is the Manila and New York is a 12 hours difference. I'm completely the nighttime, but still it's possible to communicate in that way. So we actually surprisingly have more audience outside of New York, which we are not be able to give on-site experience. However, we have instead have another possibility to reach to another side of the world. So the cultural diversity, how we appeal, how the demography of the target audiences, it's actually expanded. So this is a really unexpected issue, but it's also like a programming. We started to think about only problem is a time. So if you organize 6 o'clock in the evening, it's still possible in Asia 6 in the morning. So we started thinking about world time clock, how we can reach to the people. Yeah, but it's also, if so, we can make everything recorded. It's more accessible. It's a little bit different. So such a kind of Zoom discussion, audience can join as a Q&A immediately. So such a kind of direct response we can have. So we still try to keep this online project on live to the accessibility, but it's also interaction. So the virtual platform really gives us the great opportunity to be able to reach you directly, to communicate and share the same experience.
Thank you, Kamiya-san. There's a question for Taufik, because you work with performance-based projects. What advice do you give to create audience engagement with all of these projects transitioning online? And this is in the context of the performances not being allowed in person because of the limitations on mobility and interaction.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I have an advice, but I think what is online for us for performance, I think we can do redefinition what is online for now. Is online always about on the screen and digital, or what is online? Yeah, because actually I dodge to be rush use the performance online. So because I have not the infrastructure, and we still in the situation in the situation we didn't have a good network or internet to bring this liveness or make an added to the performance. So if for me, I think I better than to look back what is online in the case in the basic terminology, what is online. Yeah, I think I didn't. Yeah, I have an advice to how to bring performance art in online. But
Thank
yeah.
you, thank you, Taufik. It's a good thing that you brought up this notion of rethinking what the parameters of what exactly we mean by transitioning online or transitioning some projects virtually or on online platforms. There's another question for Chuong-Dai, and it has to do with the research that you've done in the region for Southeast Asia. And perhaps this is also a question that Kamiya-san and Taufik can answer, especially for Taufik, who has done projects like Us, Not Us, and we have to work with communities that are not part of the art world itself. So the question is, were there, I don't understand the phrase through lines, I don't know. Were there contradictions or even surprises in your research process? And perhaps a follow-up question with that would be, how much of the research process or the research outcomes become ultimately included in the exhibition project? Maybe Chung-Dai would like to answer the question.
At Asia Art Archive, the researchers were always involved in multiple archival projects. Right? And so in my case, I'm working on the Li Wen archive. We're in the process of finishing the first big batch of material from Green Papaya Art Projects, which is a platform based in Manila, as many of you know, that started in 2000 and that is closing in 2021. And then we have also been working with Ringo Bunoan to archive the material for 6 Manila artist-run spaces. I think one of the things that is very unique about these projects is that the researchers, we're in a really amazingly privileged position to be able to see the archive of material. And because these projects take multiple years, in that process, we create various programs to highlight the material, to make it visible. Besides just launching it online. Out of that, we also oftentimes will do an exhibition both in the AA library and sometimes at other institutions if that opportunity arises and if it makes sense. And then there are also, I think, opportunities to think about how this material can be useful in other types of spaces. And so each process takes its own shape. And as a researcher, I think it's really important to not come into a project with certain ideas about the material, but to let the material lead us. Right? What were these issues that were important to the artists? What were these issues that were important to these communities? And out of that history, we can take these lessons and also, with that, it helps us to think about our current situation. And so, with the pandemic that's happening, it is an extraordinary time, but it's not extraordinary in the sense that what we're experiencing is caused by very entrenched, systematic causes, such as racism, the legacy of colonialism, climate change, social inequities. And so these issues are not new. And I think that archival material and archival research can help us to think about this in a much longer term lens, right, through a long-term lens, so that we understand that what's happening to us is not something that is extraordinary, but that is part of a systematic development, and that if we don't heed what is happening to us, that it will happen again. And I think that these projects, artists have been thinking about these issues, right? And so how is it that we can learn from their projects and we can use that knowledge to create projects that speak to our time?
Taufik?
Can you repeat?
So the question has to do with your experience as a researcher, and were there surprises or contradictions in the process? And as a follow-up question, I would like to know how much of the research process, say for example, for projects like Us, Not Us, how much of the research goes into the project itself, the performance itself?
Yeah. The project As Not Us is the long project. It's about 1 year, and we made the long duration rehearsal, also make some public program. It is like also that way research as a research, because I think in As Not Us we also make a question for us to questioning about the position who as a us and the opposite. So in the case of this context, as not as context, this is we have we concern about the gap or the gap and the gap about how we as a citizen in Bandung of Bandung think about the residual city, like a citizen who was affected, and how we more have ethics to think about this. So we research on the site in the post eviction site, and we collection the narration of the people who affected, and we bring this in the studio, and we recomposition. We make a recompositing in as a script, and when we want use this like for our script in performance, we think about how with this with our position, if we bring this story to the public. So the problem in this project always about the ethical problem. So yeah, like that. So until now we still we still thinking about this, but in the case the performance this project
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries. That's good. Thank you, Taufik. Kamiya-san, how does the research process shape your...
Yes, usually if it's a form of the exhibition, it's easy to take 2-3 years for the research of the context and also like a location of the art pieces. But of course, it's a research in this under the pandemic, it's completely changed. Mostly you cannot visit, you cannot meet people in person, so mostly online. So already archival material, it's if we have access, we can do, but it's not more to meet an interview or oral history. Those kind of thing is extremely difficult. But on the other hand, interestingly, the accessibility because of the Zoom and the email and the online communication, it makes things so easy somehow. For example, next year, I'm working on one artist project which started in 90s and his public project. And I try to make an interview who lives in Paris. And then the curator and the director of the museum usually never be able to approach them. It's because too busy planning. But one moderator in the Puerto Rico, all in the same place because of Zoom, and nobody be allowed to go. So some accessibility make us much closer and feasible, but some physical approaches make it difficult. So it's kind of interesting combination, but it's also, now we rely on technology. It's also select some generation. Some generation cannot be used this computer so well. So we have to exclude this communication, those generations. It's really difficult. So the technology slowly kind of select or make some division who be able to use it or not be able to use it. And then often I communicate with Japan, but Japan is a country still using stamps for approval. So if it's not fit, some system is not digitalized, It's almost like a kind of big joke, but some approval not be do it because of the cultural system. So it's interestingly, something make happen easier. Some research make it difficult. And so generation gap is also much clear. So it just started, but so we can find many positive and negative parts. And it might be the next step. We can figure out how we can proceed the researches under the pandemic.
I will now mention two related questions that the speakers can answer. The first will be, will institutions consider more online exhibitions and online art experiences after the pandemic? And how ready are your institutions to transition to these modes? A related question is, we all know that budget cuts have rendered many of us unable to stage the projects we have planned for the year. From your end as curators and cultural workers, how will art continue for the otherwise economically challenged artists? On a larger scale, how has this pandemic affected the relationship between artists and curators and between artists and artistic managers? So those two are, I feel, are interrelated. Our speakers can now take turns answering them.
Yes, so I can talk about the online program. Immediately after spring, this is the only methodology, only the platform we can do some online project. We started to showing some kind of past archive as a new contents to dispatch from the institution. So more than ever, archival materials becoming important. And then next stage is how not only archiving or recording, we can create something new through the online. And for example, like a current project from here to there, all the artists is not media artists or work on digital media before, not before. So we are kind of doubted the digital platform, but now it's the only platform. So how we can use it, adapt it, and develop it. So it's in the end becoming a fascinating question. So it's on site, it's online. Online is not the kind of substitute or any lower than the on-site experience. It's different platform. So how we can kind of select depend on the contents of the program and how we can use both in the future. So we could discover new land, so-called virtual platform. So it's becoming almost kind of parallel platform, not only the kind of alternative space it could be.
Chung-Dai?
Yes, so for us, some of the things that we have been doing in the past few months is doing, of course, more online talks, okay, as other institutions have done. One of the talk series that we initiated is called Life Lessons. And this aligns with one of our research priorities or our research interests, which is how does one learn art? Okay. And so how do artists teach about art, and how can one learn about art, not just from artists, but or not just in the art academy, but in different venues. So this is something we have done. We actually just did the 5th Life Lessons last night. And then for the exhibition that I mentioned, Women Manifesto, you know, right before it opened, I'm sorry, right after we opened it in the library, we had a 3rd wave of infections in Hong Kong. And so we had to start working from home for a few weeks. And John Tane and my colleague, Ali Wong, they both did curatorial walkthroughs that were online, right? And so I think a lot of institutions are doing that. You know, that said, at the same time, I do think it's important that, you know, I think in this time when it's a real crisis, at the same time, these crises, they come and go, right? And in that sense, I'm not diminishing the really terrible things that are happening around the world. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the work that we do, I think that we have to be able to adapt to the circumstances as they come, right? And this is something that we see, you know, in those projects that I mentioned, Artists Investigating Monuments or the Collective Women Manifesto, is that they didn't have a particular way of approaching art or of working with one another, but that through talking to each other and through thinking about what was happening in a particular year, that they had the flexibility to shape that project, right? And so these projects were very porous in both inviting different people to join them, but porous also in terms of the circumstances, you know, that they were responding to. You know, and so Women Manifesto started as an exhibition, but you know, it also manifested itself as a series of works on print that was gathered in a box to be shared with everyone, right? Or it was also something that in a particular year, it made more sense for them to do performances with one another in the park. You know, in another year, it was about really focusing on a residency and gathering people. And it wasn't about that at the end of the day, you had to produce something, but it was more about gathering women in different parts of the world to give them time and space to talk to one another, to support one another, and to think about what is possible. Right? And so I think that in this time that we're going through, it's also important for us to think long term, right? So not everything is going to be online forever. I think definitely it has forced us to think more about how to do our programming and how to do exhibitions online. But at the same time, I think that is one possibility, right? There will also be the possibility of doing exhibitions in person when things open up. Yeah, but we can also think about the exhibition you know, as say something like the dictionary that is an online exhibition that keeps morphing itself. You know, we can think about the book as an exhibitionary space. You know, and so there are all these possibilities, and I think that within any particular time, that it's important that you know, the people who are involved are able to think collectively. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that I was very interested in these projects, is that it's not about one individual thinking through what to do, but it's about a group of people, you know, bring their thoughts to the table and being able to listen to each other, and in that process to shape something that is open to other people.
Thank you, Chung-Dai. Taufik?
Yeah, actually, I'm no longer working for this institution beside BPIF, but I have saw they have make a project, some project more online, and I think in Indonesia it is very much more online. It's more online, and it's related to the year-end budget. So I think the institution have like ADF have support get support from the government. But if I can imagine have like a curatorial project for to the respond this this issue or this reality or this condition, what like I mentioned in the beginning, I want to make like have a make a experiment. I want to make experiment with the particular things that we can have in online, but not only in digital, or not only not in not in digital, but in vernacular things, because I think in Indonesia still have internet gap. So I think this way to make we have more not depressed or not bored with digital situation in Indonesia, because there is a internet gap.
Thank you, Taufik. We are down to our last two questions. I will mention them, and then any of our speakers may choose to answer. How do curators, artists, and cultural practitioners intervene in the mediatization of artistic and cultural practices? Is there a way to make visible the invisible labor in cultural work without exploiting its power? The other question is, while we can connect to almost anybody at any time through digital devices, we tend to communicate with only close friends and our immediate communities. We are also experiencing an era of political and social divisionism. What is the role of contemporary art in these circumstances? So those are our last two questions, and any of our speakers may choose to answer.
So maybe it's a really big challenge ahead for us. It's some question we got, the budget cut. It's maybe also related. Budget cut also affected how to create a show, and then how we can work in a political different kind of social condition. It's all related our curatorial project making in the future. But we could know budget cut, it's not really easy to solve it, but we can also learn how we can kind of cleverly to formulate the project in this under political context. Maybe for the like a mega tour shipping, it could be less and less. It has been a kind of gigantic project toward almost a circus to the different continent and to get international attention. It's also kind of creating a new power of the, some institution in a different continent. But now this kind of traveling and the shipping in a different country with enormous budget and enormous number of people's involvement could be literally impossible, but it's also budgetally difficult. And then we have to create much kind of local attention and how we engage with more local content. But it's also not like a being friend or not being a community, how the local content can be more open up using this kind of digital eco platform. So we could have many possible contents and the challenge and how we can link it together, weave it together to create some new curatorial context related with more closely local content, but has a possibility to open up to the other culture, other openness under the very slimmed down budget situation. But connection may be open to a very new political horizon. So we know where we wanted to go, but still we have to do the practice. So it just started. So it's a really exciting. On the other hand, very challenging too.
Thank you, Kamiya-san.
Perhaps I can speak to the question of labor. So for artists investigating monuments for the Berlin project, for example, in addition to the performance, and the performative actions that Li Wen and Kai Lam engaged in with the sculpture out in front of the museum, or the institution, there was also an exhibition of previous projects that artists investigating monuments had done. Right? And so I think that the coupling of those two showed that Ames was a multi-year project, right? And that there were other artists who had created responses in relation to this prompt, but it also highlighted or made visible the community of artists, you know, who were very much, whose I think collective thinking was very important in terms of shaping how these projects evolved over the years. The other point I'd like to just talk about briefly is that archival material, you know, is a way to make visible invisible labor. Right? And so it goes back to what I was saying previously, that often in an exhibition, what we see is the artwork, you know, or we see the performance, but there was a lot of labor that led to that project. Right? The labor of the artist, the labor of the curator, of the staff of the institutions, you know, of the people involved in the research. And I think that archival material in showing drafts, you know, or showing certain documents can point to the multiple dimensions that are very important in creating any project.
Taufik, do you wish to add to the questions or?
This is a question from Mr. Ben.
Yes.
So yeah, this is a big question because I not in the contemporary art. Yeah, it is big question, but I think I have to recontextualize in condition in Bandung, because we like getting normal again, back to normal, and yeah, I don't know. This is situation have mysterious, but in other hand, we feel we get back to normal. Everybody get to outside and getting in cafe and go to many places, and actually I also have a project, but this project still going with offline. So I think I have to think about it, because this is a big question, but specific too. So yeah, I can answer very well.
Thank you, Taufik. I will end the discussion on that note. I think the pandemic has given us pause to rethink our practices and to rethink them in terms of their reach, their scale, and duration. So maybe it's time to rethink long-term, to do more local, to do more projects of various scales. And some of the questions remain unanswered. I think the staff from the Japan Foundation Manila and the Vargas Museum will collate them, and we will try to get back to you with replies from our speakers. We would like to thank once again Yuki Kamiya, Chuong-Dai Vo, and Taufik Darwis for their insightful contributions, Patrick Flores for moderating our panel, and our audiences for their participation. Director of the Japan Foundation Manila, Ben Suzuki, will now close the program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Guazon. I'm sorry, my last question is too big to summarize. But anyway, I believe I thought there are many essential questions raised and discussion, because I believe we are part of the essential workers. So this concludes our public talk for the Curatorial Development Program. Once again, we'd like to thank our partners, PCAN and UP Vargas Museum, and of course our speakers for this enlightening event. And we promise to continue such events that can strengthen curatorial exchange among regions. This webinar will also be uploaded to the Japan Foundation Manila official YouTube channel after today's discussion. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Thank you very much again. Salamat po.